Okay, so I want to show you something cool that I made recently. And that thing is a little version of GitHub Actions that I've created myself. This runs on fly.io, where I work, where you can spin up virtual machines and that kind of thing. So let's see what this thing looks like. If you can imagine creating a YAML file that kind of looks like a GitHub Action YAML file, this is what it looks like right here, right? If you're familiar with GitHub Actions, you'll know what this looks like. We have some steps, and each step will run something. In this case, it'll use a different GitHub repository that gets pulled down, and that GitHub repository tells a little program I wrote what to do. So in this case, we have a GitHub repo flow print payload, and that is just going to print a payload, a JSON payload that we give this GitHub action or GitHub action, this thing I created. Step 2 just runs a command to print out the current directory. Step 3 just echoes the word foo. And step 4 runs a different action thing that I created under the hookflow namespace here. S3 that installs the S3 CLI and pretends to do something based on, like access keys and buckets for S3 and all that kind of good stuff. So how do we convert this YAML file into something that actually is run on a server somewhere? So what I did is just wrote a little Go program. And that Go program just does a bunch of stuff. It just runs through and unmarshals. In other words, it reads that YAML file. And it sees if it has the uses keyword, then it grabs a repository and clones it and looks for specific files in there. And if there are those files there, those files tell it what to do, like run some bash or run some JavaScript or something. So fly.io will take a Docker image and run it as a virtual machine. It doesn't run containers, but it converts it to a virtual machine and runs it. So we just need to create a working Docker file. So that's what I have here in that Go project that just does all the stuff I described. So this will build our Golang project in a image called runner. So it just gets the dependencies. It builds the Go program. It calls it /runner. So it saves it in a command that is in the /runner location in the server and the root directory, I guess, in the container, the image we're building this in. And then it grabs another image. Developer hook loop is a Docker Hub image I already created. It's just Ubuntu and it has some utilities on it like curl and wget and jq or whatever. And that grabs from the image up here that we named runner and grabs the /runner Golang binary that we built and just saves it in user local bin runner, which it's in the path inside of the Ubuntu container. So we can just call runner whenever we boot up this container and it'll run this little runner program that'll read the YAML and do the needful. So it's actually kind of simple. Like Golang's kind of fun for that kind of stuff. I like it. So what I'm going to do here is run this on fly, and it's actually pretty easy. I have this file make request, and all it does is make a curl request against the fly API to create a machine, which is just a virtual machine. So this is the curl request. It's just calling the API for fly at API machines.dev. Hook loop app or hook loop play is the name of the app, which I already created ahead of time. And I just make a JSON request, passing it my, fly auth token or whatever. So I have permission to run against my account. And it's going to pass it all the parameters of this API.json file here. That's what the ampersand symbol means. It's just grabbing a file and passing that as a parameters, as the parameters for this post request that we're making. Let's just see that API.json file. And this is what the web request will look like. This is the JSON data that we make to the Fly API. So I want to spin this up in the Boston region. The image, this is the image that we built that I just showed you, that Docker image from that Docker file. I pushed it up to the Docker hub location for developer hook loop runner. And that's it. It's just going to run this image. It's going to fly. It's going to convert it to a virtual machine. And that's kind of it. 2 CPUs, 2 gigs RAM, auto destroy true, which is kind of neat. It's kind of like using the --rm the remove flag. If a Docker, when you're running a Docker image to make a Docker container, it's going to destroy it after it runs, which is neat. And processes, this is actually superfluous. I didn't need to define a process of a command of runner because that's already defined in the Docker file, but why not have it there anyway? And here's the really neat thing. On spin up of a virtual machine on fly, you can tell it to create some files for you from this data. So in the server, create an opt payload JSON file. This is just a bit of JSON. It's like just garbage JSON. It doesn't mean anything. That's the payload that's going to print out. If you remember from that YAML file, what the first step is to print the JSON payload, which is just this. And then in here, it's going to copy that hook loop YAML file, the same one we saw that defines the actions to take. and it's going to pop that in opt hookloop.yaml also. And the values for these files are just base64 encoded, whatever, it's just the value, but it's base64 encoded. And that's how you get the values into the file onto the server. Okay, so let's make that request. And then we're going to print out the logs of this virtual machine as it's running the stuff, right? It's going to run that little Golang binary in this Docker image because the Docker image is going to pull it in, and it's going to make a virtual machine from that. So we got the responses there. It's just doing stuff. Let's check out the logs here. And I'm doing some awk stuff to only print out certain portions of the log output just to make it a little cleaner here. So it's configuring Firecracker because Vertfly runs on Firecracker, which is the same thing that AWS's Lambda runs on. It's starting it, it's rating the files we told it to make, and then it's going to run our thing. Let's use some log output here. This is from our Golang code. Executing the manifest, preparing the step, it's cloning that repo, and then it's running that action, the action complete. So we have the output of that action, and that's just the bit of JSON, that payload, which is, like I said, just a bunch of garbage. And then it's running the next step, right? The next step, I think, was to print the current directory, which is the output here, right? There's nothing in it, so it's just small. And then it echoes foo, and then it does all this S3 stuff. And the S3 stuff actually got run here, but my output's truncated for some reason. I don't know why. Let's get rid of this stuff. And we'll see there's actually is all this S3 garbage here. It has a lot of output because it installs the AWS CLI tool in that step. And, it's doing the stuff, it's running. So there we have it. I just kind of made GitHub Actions myself because why not? It's kind of easy and fun.